Welcome to the Odds Breakers, number one place for shared, sharp betting information.
Welcome back to podcast 25 of 2021. I'm your host, Kiev O'Neill. Follow me on Twitter at OBKiev. Follow us at The Odds Breakers. Follow us on social media /The Odds Breakers. This episode is being brought to you by MyBookie.ag. For a 200% sign-up bonus, please visit MyBookie and use the promo code ODDS200. Terms, conditions, and locations apply. If you'd like to help us out with our costs and sponsor the website and the podcast, we'd love to help you out. Please visit theoddsbreakers.com, click shop, and become a member. For $24.99 a month, you can get my plays before the line moves. And if nothing else, please visit theoddsbreakers.com and become a free picks newsletter subscriber. My friends, and then there were four. UCLA, Gonzaga, Houston, and Baylor are in the Final Four.
Come on, don't bullshit me.
No bullshit. Only 0.0002% of brackets had the Final Four right because of little old UCLA upsetting every single team that they pretty much faced. So, big credit to UCLA for doing what they did. Team shot poorly against them, but that's partially because of their defense there. Really trending up on defense since this tournament started. So you got to give them credit for doing what they did to help stop these teams, slowing down the games. Great for them. And Gonzaga, really great for them that they get to go against an 11 seed, I suppose. 11 seed that's probably better than their actual seeding, especially according to the efficiency sites now. Well, and this day. So, good stuff. Baylor, very expected, getting to the Final Four. A lot of people had that in their brackets as well. And Houston, probably the least used number 2 seed coming in, had a very easy way playing only double-digit seeds to get to the Final Four. That has never happened to this day. So, amazing stuff right there. But, my friends, we have a lot going on. There's horse racing coming up. There's baseball coming up. We have a fantastic guest for you right now on this show to cover your 2021 MLB season, Mr. Adam Burke from ATS.io. Very excited to talk to Adam about some baseball and the Final Four. Baseball starts tomorrow. Very, very excited for that. Also, later this week, we're going to have possibly a little Marco D'Angelo to talk about the big prep races coming up this weekend. And we're going to bring on Andy Molitor from Betsports.com and the Deep Dive podcast to discuss a little bit more Final Four and whatever the heck else he wants to talk about. So for this episode, we're going to go Adam only because we have a lot of baseball to discuss as well as the Final Four. Before Adam comes on, I want to quick talk about our bracket challenge and standings. Obviously, the Gonzagas and the Baylors are looking pretty good right now, 2 number 1 seeds. In the bracket challenge at the Odds Breakers, there are not many people that had Houston or UCLA especially winning this thing. As a matter of fact, if you have UCLA in your Final Four bracket, you probably went to UCLA, or you're probably a pretty big fan of them.
Unreal.
Or maybe you're just smarter than us all, because that's very possible as well. But congratulations if you're one of those 2,800 so brackets that actually has the Final Four correct here. But in the Odds Breakers Bracket Challenge, our standings are Jory Osborne in first place. He could score 137 points. Daniel Redding, 115 points. He could score second at 75 points. And Brad Toussaint still there with the Illinois pick at 74 points here. So interesting, if Gonzaga loses, I suppose Brad would be looking a little bit better right here to place. But third place, you have Radomir Pavosovic, and he is at 74 points as well. So if Gonzaga wins, they could be looking good. But the problem with those top three is they all have Illinois in the final game. So if you want to go a little bit down, no, sorry, one has Houston in the final game. So if that works out well, but if Baylor wins, some of these other brackets that are a little bit lower could creep up a little bit here and steal those, I believe, was it 14 points here for the final game to get into the final game? Josh Brown, Joe Bryan, Kobe Wenner is sitting back there waiting as well. And then you have some people that pick Baylor to win it all, and Greg Rogers, Ronnie Delia, and Sarah Marie. So look at that. We have Baylor lurking as well. So it's still going to be an interesting finish as far as the bracket challenge. My friends, we have a lot to talk about. And so we're going to be discussing a preview for the baseball season, a little bit of advanced metrics on how to use them to handicap, as well as the Final Four with Mr. Adam Burke. So without further ado, let's get Adam on the show. And now I'm very happy to bring back one of the best in the business of sports betting as well as podcasting, and someone who I've admired for a very long time, Mr. Adam Burke from ATS.io. You can follow him on Twitter at Skating Tripods. Adam, can you believe it's baseball season?
No, I can't. I mean, it's crazy. The days just kind of fly by. And, when I first put up the MLB betting guide, I think it was February 25th, it felt like the season was an eternity away. And now it's here. I mean, it's Christmas Eve for me, and I'm excited to, get back into a full baseball season with hopefully 162 games and kind of see how things play out.
Yeah, me too. Major League Baseball tickets already ready. I got all the games I can watch. It's a nice little ending to the basketball season. That was a lot of ups and downs this season. But, baseball, I'm very excited to get your thoughts on this. You spent so much time in the offseason here on that guide. So we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into some of that. But obviously we still have some basketball to talk about here as well. Final Four is here, Adam. I think this is an obvious question, but what's the biggest surprise?
Well, the biggest surprise is that we actually have two number one seeds after the tournament that we've seen here so far. I mean,
still alive,
right? it's absolutely crazy what we've kind of seen. But, I think when you look at how things transpired over the course of the season, we all thought Michigan was a fairly vulnerable number one seed. It turns out that they were. They got, I'm not going to say fortunate to beat LSU, but that was a tough game for them. Florida State had an awful game plan. And then, of course, they get tripped up by UCLA and what the Pac-12 has been able to do here. But, Gonzaga and Baylor, the two best teams I think that we had all season long, making it through what has just been kind of a mess overall, that's actually kind of surprising to me. And I'm burying the lead here. We all know the easiest surprise is UCLA. But I think just the fact that Gonzaga and Baylor have not only made it to this point while other good teams have struggled, but they've largely been dominant in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And Baylor had a few scares. I mean, the Villanova was a little bit of a scare. Gonzaga didn't seem to get any scares, but that's not what we thought coming in. I mean, coming in when you're filling out your bracket, it was like, yeah, there's a chance Gonzaga. They had a horrible schedule. That's what you're thinking. And then you kind of see what Gonzaga really is, and it's almost like no duh. And you get worried about some of the ways the games are officiated. I mean, obviously some of the teams weren't expecting some of the refs swallowing the whistles, right? I mean, there's all kinds of things and angles that happened throughout this tournament. And yeah, obviously UCLA, I was baiting you into that one. That's clearly the biggest surprise going on. But I think you have to ask yourself, how much of that is real from UCLA? And I think we'll have to talk a little bit about that as well, Adam. I think that Mick Cronin's done a pretty good job. I disagree with him not fouling that Alabama overtime, but he seemed to win it anyway, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. They got through, and that's kind of been one of the things for really the Pac-12 as a whole. I don't want to use the phrase team of destiny, but there were some things that probably shouldn't have worked out for those teams that have to this point. And USC runs into Gonzaga, and that was a complete and utter mismatch from the start. Oregon State, looked like they were going to get blown out, and then in fact, of course, they come back to cover the number, much to the chagrin of some people that I know. But this UCLA team, and we kind of talked about this on my show, ATS Radio, on Wednesday, that these teams that kind of find ways to dictate the pace and the tempo against almost everybody and make that opponent uncomfortable have had a lot of success here. And UCLA has really done that. I know they played to a little bit of a quickened pace there against Alabama, due in large part to the fact that that game went to overtime. But playing Michigan to 59 possessions, I mean, I don't know if that was a coaching faux pas from Juwan Howard or what, but there is no business for Michigan to play at that slow of a tempo when they clearly had the better offense in that game and frankly had the better. You've got to play a higher variance game with a higher number of possessions where you're the better team every time there's a possession in that game. To play to 59 possessions is just inexcusable, but it speaks to what UCLA has been able to do in this tournament to make people uncomfortable, frustrate, and fluster them. And, whether they've fallen on the right side of Lady Luck or not, I mean, they're here and other teams aren't because of, the style of play that the Bruins have. Very true.
UCLA, lots of credit. They really packed it in there and stopped Hunter Dickinson. Franz Wagner, forced to shoot. They kind of one of those things where they get into the paint and then they, get bumped a bit and not used to not getting fouls like they did all year in the Big Ten. And then they kind of like, well, what do we do now? And that's where the coaching didn't come in from Juwan Howard, in my opinion. And that's where number two, the Isaiah Livers injury kind of showed its ugly face. I think that leader is what you needed to bail them out of that situation. And it didn't show. I mean, I saw two different teams against Florida State and against UCLA for Michigan. So sadly, though, Adam, 9 teams in the tournament, not one in the Final Four for the Big Ten. And I was harping on that for a while, that the Big Ten is a little bit overrated. I never thought the Pac-12 was overrated or underrated until I saw what they've been doing here, and it's just really through not turning the ball over and playing really good defense. I don't think that they're necessarily the best teams. I just think that they won because of smarts. They played very good, smart ball. I give Mick Cronin credit for slowing this game down and frustrating Michigan, and obviously I have to take away some of the credit for what Michigan's accomplished if they can't get over that hump as well, because Franz Wagner going 1 for 14 or whatever it was is part of the reason why they lost that game, and some of the coaching. But Mick Cronin's going to have a new animal against Gonzaga, won't he?
Yeah, he absolutely will. And I think that something that may have benefited the Pac-12 a little bit is that a lot of those teams play a lot of different styles. You have teams that slow it down. You have teams that speed it up. You have teams that, shoot from the outside. You have teams that play from the block. You just have a wide variety of styles in the Pac-12. So you kind of see everything. You get exposed to everything. And in the Big Ten, a lot of those teams tend to play very similar. I know Iowa is a very offense-first team, and maybe plays at one of the quicker paces in that conference. But, other than that, a lot of those teams are just kind of boilerplate. They're just kind of carbon copy. They all play similar. They all take care of the ball. They all don't use a lot of ball pressure on defense. And so they kind of ran into some of those things they don't see during the regular season here in the tournament, and they had problems with it. The thing here about this one for UCLA is that Gonzaga sees this a lot. St. Mary's tries to slow it down against them a ton. And it's worked in the past, and I guess that would kind of be the concern for Gonzaga here, is that they have tripped up in that slow-paced environment against a team that really tries to limit the possessions. But at the same time, this is the best Gonzaga team that Mark Few has had. It's the most complete, the most consistent, the most balanced. They're just on a different level than not only UCLA, but everybody else that's not only left in this tournament, but got into this tournament. I mean, you think about the look-ahead lines, and regardless of who they play, whether it's Baylor or Houston, assuming they beat UCLA here, they're a touchdown or more favorite against either one of those teams and a double-digit favorite against Houston. So this is just a massive step up in class for the Bruins, and one that I don't think that they pass this test.
Right, and you see the line movement already going up. I mean, they were talking about it opening last night on Twitter. Everyone was tweeting about 13's the biggest spread that we've ever seen in a Final Four game since I think Duke played Michigan back in 2002 or 99, one of those years. So what I was thinking, I was like, 13? Wait till it closes, because that's going to be the story. I see this thing closing at 15 and possibly a little bit more. I mean, who's going to be back in UCLA? When they're scoring 50-some points, and they just know Gonzaga is going to score 80. I don't think UCLA has a chance. And so I do agree with the line move going up here, Adam. So, I mean, anything on this game? Do you see any value in it?
It's really tough, because I could see talking myself into the under, and not because I think UCLA dictates the pace or really controls the environment, but simply because I just don't think UCLA scores a whole lot in this game. And if Gonzaga has that big second half lead, as we all anticipate, do they pack it away? I mean, they have not been a team to do that with big leads in the second half here this season, but they've got a game coming up against the winner of Houston and Baylor, and they will know who they're going to be playing in that national championship game, to the point where maybe Mark Few empties the bench and says, you know what, these guys that have contributed in practice, these guys that have played against our starting five, going through all these reps and everything, I'm going to let those guys play in the Final Four. Because a lot of times you get these teams where they can only play those bench guys in that first game or maybe the second round game or something like that. Mark Few may look at this as an opportunity to say, you know what? These guys are going to get to say for the rest of their lives that they played in a Final Four game. And maybe that's something that means a lot to him, and maybe it kind of slows Gonzaga down a little bit, kind of throws a wrench in the game. On the flip side, though, Mark Few could empty the bench and let those guys play the Gonzaga style of basketball, and they just go out there and find open looks and chuck shots and, just have fun with it. And that could push the game over. So I lean under, but I don't think I'm going to play anything side or total here. Except for maybe Gonzaga -8 first half. I think that they, get out ahead early and kind of do what they did to USC.
Yeah, and I think part of USC is the pressure of the situation. They were missing a lot of their shots, and you saw timeouts being called right away for USC. I mean, timeouts were early to try to slow this Gonzaga team down, and it still didn't work. I mean, they're missing some layups, missing some 5-foot jumpers, stuff that they didn't do against Kansas, stuff that they didn't do against Oregon. So when people talked about regression, they're absolutely right for USC. They really regressed, and I think the moment was too big for them. But I wonder if that's going to happen with UCLA, because both scenarios you talked about shows UCLA getting blown up. Are we bringing the kids in early, and are they going to score? Or are they going to run the clock out, So, that just kind of shows you that this line movement is probably where it should be going, according to, that comparison, thinking about the total on this game, just because the backups are coming in. But, you're looking at UCLA's trend line on Torvik. Opponent field goal percentage, it skyrockets, right? I mean, it really shoots right up since the tournament started. How much of that is luck, Adam? How much of that is real defense is my question.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question to ask. I mean, like I said, you get a lot of these teams that slow the game down. They kind of play it at their pace. And what invariably happens is that the better team, and in some of the cases here in the tournament, the better offense, they just get out of rhythm. They're not making those shots. They're not getting those same looks. They're not feeling as comfortable as they usually do. Maybe Gonzaga falls victim to that. I guess it's a possibility. But one thing about the teams that, UCLA has played up to this point, they're not super balanced on offense. They've got a couple of guys that kind of carry the load for them. Gonzaga's got like 5 or 6 guys that you can rely on to score if necessary. So if some guy is out of whack or a couple of guys are out of whack, somebody else will take the shots. Somebody else will get a high percentage look, probably knock it down, something like that. They're a very unselfish team. They share the basketball so well that, I think that UCLA has gotten a little bit lucky to get to this point. Certainly they've gotten very fortunate with the opposition 3-point percentage. It feels like a spot where all of that kind of comes crashing down, whether that's just natural regression or because of the opponent that they're playing, and quite frankly, probably a combination of both.
All right, so, Gonzaga's defense has been a little bit better too. So looking at a team total under for UCLA is interesting, because do they finally hit that regression? And, do they adjust to speed? I don't know. Really great questions there. But if they're running the clock at the end, I'd be more concerned about UCLA getting to their team total than almost Gonzaga, if that makes any sense, Adam.
Yeah, the thing about Gonzaga and teams like that, and we see that a lot in college football too, where, the defensive metrics can be a little bit misleading because they're winning games by such a big number that, the game kind of speeds up a little bit. The tempo gets a little bit faster. Maybe they're not as focused, not as engaged defensively as they would be otherwise, to where, look, how many games did they win by 15, 20, 25 points, where in the second half of that game, they couldn't care less defensively. So, they probably are a much better defensive team than the metrics would show, simply because they haven't had to play defense for a full game all that often. But when they've been asked to, they've by and large been able to do it, especially here later on in the season.
All right. I suppose your example of the fact that they're blowing teams away so much, they kind of let them a little bit in the game, makes my efficiency number 81 to 67, which is 148. I mean, if you look at the other metrics, you see you have 150, 149, the total. That doesn't really punish the neutral venue either. So I'm going to lean to the over on this one, I guess. But I think it's something I'm not going to get too invested in either, Adam.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of equity in this game. I mean, again, you're asking a team to win by a very large number where you wonder, what the second half of this game looks like. Because, if they are up big, I mean, it's only human nature to start thinking about that game on Monday.
Right. And maybe you take a team total on the Zags because it's not going to be that high. It's probably going to be around 80 points. As a matter of fact, I thought that it was out already. Team total 79.5. So I haven't seen many games where they haven't hit 80 points. So
I think they've been under 80 twice. And that's it.
Yeah, right. The whole year, and they're probably going to get their points here. So maybe you take a team total over and kind of that might be your best bet on that one. Let's move on to the next game, Adam. And we already talked a little bit about this on your podcast, ats.io. That's available pretty much on every single podcasting platform. We have a little bit of disagreement in this game. Houston versus Baylor. The number's Baylor minus 5-ish. The total is 136, Adam. It's funny. When this line came out, I thought it moved a little bit more towards Houston, but I'm seeing a lot of Baylor money coming in, and you agree with the market.
Yeah, I agree with the Baylor money here in this one. I mean, you look at the last three teams that they've played, and by KenPom rank, they're 13th, 12th, and 19th with Wisconsin, Villanova, and Arkansas. Houston's last three opponents, meanwhile, 38th, 41st, and 43rd. So Baylor's had a tougher route to get here. I think they've looked more impressive in the process. They've easily got the better offense in this game. They are the number one three-point shooting offense in the country. They're a very efficient two-point shooting team as well. They take good care of the basketball. And I think that they could wind up with some extra possessions in this game also with that aggressive ball pressure defense. They're one of the top 5, top 10 in the country in turnover percentage. So I think they get some extra possessions here, and being the better offensive team, I like that quite a bit. Houston, even though they've, and in fairness, I mean, they're playing top 45 caliber teams here in this tournament, with the exception, of course, of Cleveland State, who they blew out in the first game. But their opponents, 42.1% on twos in this tournament, for the full season around 43%. But opponents in this tournament from three, 34.3%. During the year, 29.2% was what they allowed on threes. The AAC is just not a very good offensive conference this year, and even some of the better teams in that conference struggle offensively, namely Memphis. So the fact that Houston has not done as well defending the three in this tournament as they've done for the full season body of work leads me to believe that Baylor has some success with that distance jump shooting game. And again, like I said, they've just played a tougher path to get here. The defense seems to have figured it out after struggling late in the regular season. I like Baylor minus the 5 here.
What's funny about this Houston team is that you do look at in the American Athletic Conference, and they are a poor shooting conference, and that probably does skew their effective field goal percentage on defense, ranking number 1 in the nation and things like that, 11th against the three. And you pointed out very well before that they in the tournament, people are shooting better threes against them than they were all season. The funny thing about them is that they get the American Athletic Conference all year, and they don't even get a top-seeded team. As a matter of fact, they got all double-digit seeded teams in the tournament. Has there been a better red carpet for this team coming into the Final Four?
No, first team ever to get to the Final Four and not play a single-digit seed. By the way, the American Athletic Conference, 28th in effective field goal percentage offense here this season, according to Bart Torvik. That's better than the MEAC, the MAAC, and the SWAC, and that's it.
Oh, that's bad. That's bad. I have to attest, and it's funny, we've been talking about that, and that's why I faded Houston in a couple spots that worked out, and I took an under on the Syracuse. That worked out well, but the funny thing about this is Houston has never been a dog, and they've been a dog once against Texas Tech, and then they ended up blowing out Texas Tech, which is a halfway decent team, not that great, but decent. So do you think it's going to affect them being a dog, how they approach this game? Does it make them a little bit more dangerous?
I mean, I guess to a degree, but the problem that I have here with this one is, while Houston is the better defensive team, one of their big advantages over a lot of teams, and in particular here in the AAC, is their offensive rebounding. And they don't have that advantage here in this game. And so you've got this much more efficient offensive Baylor team, especially from a shooting percentage standpoint, to where they're going to make more shots, and if they don't make them, they should still get their fair share of offensive rebounds, whereas Houston's not going to make as many shots, at least based on the metrics and the stats that are out there, and may get a similar number of offensive rebounds. So I just think Baylor, they're going to have so many more high percentage chances to score in this game that I think Houston is obviously a deserving dog here. As we talked about on my show, and as I'm sure you're going to get to here, this is a bigger line than what the metric sites have. I mean, most of them are plus or minus 1, depending on where you look, and this one's 5. So I think it speaks to the market confidence in Baylor. It speaks to maybe a little bit of a negative sentiment about Houston, whether that's conference related or based on who they've played here in the tournament. But I tend to think that at this stage of the game, despite how much I love the metrics and those resources that are out there, I think 5 is a more efficient line than what we're seeing from the other sites.
All right, well, that's very well put. And I think we can definitely see that there's been some weaknesses in these efficient sites. All 3 of them, too, because the ones that we talk about most, Bart Torvik, Ken Pom, and Haslametrics has this game within 1 point on either side. And partly because they've had Houston so high. Houston hasn't had much of a chance to regress, right? But the thing that worries me about Baylor is, yes, they do get their own offensive rebounds very well, but they only rebound 30.6% of the defensive opportunities, ranking 273rd. And so Houston's going to get their second chance shots. Another thing about Houston, they don't turn the ball over as much, ranking 41st in the nation on turning the ball over, while that's what Baylor needs to do. They great ball pressure. They get you to turn the ball over. I think both teams, by the way, have great ball pressure here, and Houston kind of showed that against Syracuse. Syracuse really couldn't do nothing with that ball. But what I do worry about Baylor is that they don't defend the field goal that well. And I know Houston doesn't shoot that well, and Baylor definitely has the advantage there. But Baylor's effective field goal percentage only 48.9 on defensive adjusted, ranking 120th in the nation. So I do wonder if Grimes is going to hit those shots. Funny about this spread, I do agree with your points, but my spread's 3. It's not 5. It's not Pick'em where Torvik has it. It's not Pick'em where Ken Pom has it, or 1, whatever. I'm in the middle here, so we're going to bet a big triple IPA beer on this one, Adam. I'm going to take the points in here and see what happens here, my man.
I agree, man. If we're going to make a side bet on this, it's got to be a 10% or higher on the ABV.
All right. Well, that's a guarantee. I don't even think we have to discuss that part of it, but for sure 10%er, and maybe we'll even do a Waldo special on that one. So we'll look into that one. I think the most important thing, these Final Four lines, they're pretty sharp in general, right? I mean, there's a reason it's 5 points off the efficiency lines. There's a lot of people betting into these lines, right? It's going to be much sharper than your average SWAC line, right, Adam? So just word to the listeners out there, don't get overly invested in the Final Four. Look forward to some other stuff that you can do, like some baseball, some horse racing, UFC, NFL drafts coming out. So we're going to be all covering that as well. So don't you agree, Adam? Not a ton of value in the Final Four.
Yeah, no. I mean, if you've got one of your biggest bets of the year on the Final Four, you're doing it wrong. You need to attack markets in the regular season where there are 140 games, 150 games, where there are going to be line errors or things that just aren't accounted for out there. Look, these are 2 games on Saturday. There's no UFC this weekend. There's no NASCAR. The NBA's probably taking a backseat for a lot of people for a long period of time. Most people aren't too invested in baseball early on in the season, I don't think. These 2 games will have massive, enormous, huge handles. And if you think that there's a line that's egregiously off, it's probably not.
It's not, because the syndicates would be on the other side of it, and they'd be moving it. the public money is not even going to show up until really later in this. But some of the early money did come in and made a stance for Baylor. The early money is kind of making a stance, for Gonzaga, and kind of making a stance for Baylor. So, there you go. Possibly even waiting if you like the dog in either of these games would be the best bet for you. But this is a great segue going into baseball, which if you did do your homework, you might have an edge the first 2, 3, 4 weeks coming into this season. And Adam, I don't think there's anybody better or that does more homework than you here. You wrote an amazing MLB guide that you can find on ats.io. I've read some of it already. How much does creating this guide help you prepare as a sports bettor for the upcoming baseball season?
Yeah, it's really beneficial for me, and it's something that I start really doing around mid to late January, taking a look at where players have kind of gone with free agency, how some of these teams are setting up, and then of course start digging into the metrics from the previous season, where obviously that's a little bit skewed, a little bit bastardized because we only played 60 games last year, but it helps me tremendously. It helps me look at strengths and weaknesses for teams overall. Helps me look at depth. Depth is a massive factor in my season-long handicap, whether that's a win total or betting something in the futures market, one of those types of things. But it helps me a lot. It helps me organize my thoughts, which is important. And I do a lot of individual player research as well over the course of writing these things, because what I'm ultimately looking for is improvement in the aggregate. I want to see individual players that are getting better, where the sum of all parts makes the team better, or the obvious, the other side of guys that aren't going to be as good, or somebody who left in free agency or something like that, and the impact that could have on the team. So it takes me down to a player level. It allows me to look at a team level at some of the, their trend lines, like we just talked about with college basketball. There are some trend lines for Major League Baseball teams too. Are teams hitting more fly balls? Are they making more quality contact? Are they doing something different on the pitching side, increasing spin rates, or focusing more on having strikeout guys at the back end of the bullpen, something like that. All of it, the entire process of researching, writing, and editing the guide not only puts me in the right mindset for the season, but fills in a lot of gaps of things that maybe I didn't realize, things maybe I wasn't going to account for, or just to help me pinpoint the areas that are going to be of great importance for me.
100%. And I also think that it makes you able to adjust quicker, to have a reason why this team has done this, or a reason why this team B has done that, or possibly even know when they just had some bad luck and this is a buy on team because I am certain on what I've done research on, when the public might just start fading that team at the wrong time. So you can, just by all that research that you've done, I think you have a big edge on the upcoming season compared to the market itself. And to be honest with you, this guide, it doesn't expire the first day, because starting pitchers only pitch like 2 or 3 or maybe 3 to 4 times in the first 4 weeks, right? So what is the expiration date on this thing? I was thinking like May or maybe even up to June.
Yeah, I would say, the first part of May is probably where I would start, kind of adjusting off of some of my preseason thoughts and all of that. The thing that's really challenging about this season is we had that 60-game season last year. And so pitcher workloads were down. But also, maybe more importantly, public sentiment about last season is that it didn't matter, that it doesn't count, that it was, so screwed up and so messed up. And you had teams with the COVID pause. You had the 7-inning doubleheaders, and some teams played a lot more of those than others did. I think a lot of people go into this season thinking that nothing that happened last year matters. And I disagree with that point. So that's something that also helped me not only prepare for this season, but something that I think could be relevant throughout most of April, where teams did make a concerted effort to change something. And it's something that will stick, but may not be accounted for in the market. So I think there's at least, a good 4 to 5 weeks of shelf life to the guide, even after the season starts, whether it's on an individual level or just on a team level, where maybe there's a team that I think is pegged for some positive regression, or maybe the other side, negative regression. And I can kind of follow that through here throughout this first month of the season.
Oh, great stuff there. And something I failed to remember to ask you, maybe I should quick ask you now, put you on the spot. What are some of those rule changes that are sticking from last year to this year, similar to like the 7th inning double hitter guy on second starting overtime. What's going to stick and what's actually just brand new in general?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing for a lot of different reasons because, you've got the 7-inning doubleheader again this year. That's going to stick around, which I'm pretty bummed about, to be totally honest with you. I don't really like that idea, but I understand why they're doing it. They want to protect the pitchers who are going to have pretty significant innings workload increases for this season. Also, the young players that, will have a lot more plate appearances, a lot more innings in the field, stuff like that. So they are keeping the 7-inning doubleheader. They are doing the runner on second base to start extra innings, which, again, not really a super big fan of that. The postseason is going back to the regular 10, though. So that is something that will be happening here where you won't have the expanded playoffs for this year. But also, they still have the 26-man roster. You've got the taxi squad of guys you can call up, based on injuries and all of that. So, really a lot of what we saw from last season carries over, including the 3-batter minimum for relief pitchers that come into a game. They got to face 3 batters unless they finish an inning or get hurt. So, all those things are pretty much the same here. But, obviously the hope would be that we don't have to deal with any COVID outbreaks and just, massive gaps on the rosters.
Yeah, for sure. And I understand they're trying to speed up the game, which has been a challenge for baseball as our country and I guess world gets into a much faster pace with phones and expectations. So I understand our attention span, unfortunately, has went completely down the tube. But I also understand that baseball has made some adjustments for that. So that makes sense to me. Is 10 teams correct for you, Adam, for the postseason?
Yeah, I think so. Because a lot of times in Major League Baseball here, you've got a certain number of teams that are trying, a lot of teams that really aren't. They're in various states of a rebuild or something like that. And, usually the middle is kind of weak. You wind up with a lot of teams hovering within a game or two of 500, something like that. I think that you have to incentivize the regular season in some way. And I think 10 is enough. You get that wild card play-in game, kind of see what happens with that. The only thing I would change is, and logistically, I guess this might be a little bit tough, but I would make the wild card a best of 3. I think one game, anything can happen in a 1-game sample. I've talked about this before, like the San Diego Padres, for example, second favorites to win the World Series, at least as far as National League teams go. Well, if they don't beat the Dodgers for the division, they could win 100 games. Dodgers could win 105. They lose the division by 5 games, but they've won 100. They go to the wild card game and they face the Mets, and they face Jacob deGrom. And it's like, okay, you won 100 games, but your season comes down to this one game against the reigning 2-time Cy Young Award winner who could very well get another one. Like, it's unfair in that context. So I think a best of 3 for the wild card is what I would change, but I would stick with, 5 teams from each league.
Yeah, 100%. I thought about that too last year. Why is a team that won so many games being punished because it doesn't go by, the whole league itself, right? Sometimes you in those Central Division, you get some of those teams that are just better than everybody else, but they're punished because they didn't win it. So I completely agree with that. And by the way, I made a faux pas. I think I said overtime instead of extra innings. I should be ashamed of myself. Don't ever do that in baseball. My mind's still on basketball, Adam. So I just wanted to make sure that our listeners know that I caught that. So let's get into something that's actually pretty important to me in understanding this and how it should be used for handicapping. Because I'll be honest, I use OPS, and for your listeners, slugging plus on-base percentage. It's been a great stat for baseball, but they have more advanced stuff out there now, like OPS plus, WRC, and WRC plus. What's better to use when handicapping these games, the plus, or should we stick to the OPS and the WRC itself?
Well, the plus means relative to league average. So that's really all that the plus means, is it's just a plus or minus from league average, where 100 for both OPS and WRC plus, which stands for weighted runs created plus. 100 is league average. So anything above 100, that is the percent above league average that a player or a team is. And similarly, anything below 100, that's the percent below league average that a player or a team is. Now, OPS is on base plus slugging. WRC Plus is a much more intricate formula that uses something called weighted runs created. And the reason why I prefer sabermetric stats, and in this case WRC Plus over an OPS Plus, is because when you look at on-base percentage, for example, everything counts the same. A walk counts the same as a single. A walk counts the same as a double, as a triple, as a home run. A single counts the same as a home run, etc., etc. With on-base percentage, there is no differentiation between the fact that a double is a lot more productive than a walk. It just simply is. Whether there's nobody on base, you get a guy in scoring position right away. A walk, you just go to first. A walk, if there are men on base, they only move up one base. A double, a guy could score from third, from second, from first, so on and so forth. So the way in which a guy reaches base is more important depending on how they do it. So that's what WRC Plus, like a weighted runs created plus, will do, is it evaluates those individual outcomes and puts a run value on them. So to me, I think it's a better stat in terms of describing how productive a player actually is offensively. So that's why I prefer to use sabermetric stats like WRC Plus, like WOBA, which is actually weighted on base average, which is what weighted runs created comes from, where WOBA is an improved version of on-base percentage. Slugging percentage, as we know, is total bases divided by at-bats. So OPS and slugging added together is sort of like a more basic form of a WOBA or something like that. So it's just different ways of kind of talking about the same types of stats, but I think one is just more advanced than the other.
Do both take into consideration the ballparks that they're played at? So
the thing about both of those being plus, the OPS plus and the WRC plus, they are park and league adjusted. So that's where you get the whole league average concept where, it's adjusted to the park and it's adjusted to the league. So it's kind of based on like the run environment, so to speak, of that season of Major League Baseball with the park factor and also with what everybody else is doing. That's what the plus is. OPS and WRC on their own are not adjusted to the park or the league average, but OPS plus, WRC plus, anything with a plus is adjusted to the league average.
Which I kind of like because, there's much different playing in Colorado than there is, for example, in Miami or Seattle, right? The balls fly a lot better in Colorado. Air is thinner, higher elevation, all the other reasons for the ballpark. So, and I think I'm going to start using the plus more in my handicapping from a change from last year, Adam. So thank you very much for explaining that. And that's some stuff that, you learned from listening to ATS.io. Great stuff there. Next question. Does the market take into account a pitcher's fly ball rate with ballparks that happen to be affected by the wind on a given day, like Wrigley Field? I've had success in the past just handicapping totals on a pitcher's fly ball rate. The wind's blowing in. He's got a high fly ball rate. It's looking more towards the under than a ground ball pitcher. If the fly ball rate's high and the wind's really blowing out, I can definitely see some home runs. And it's been successful in the past, but is the market going to be picking up on that a little bit more, or have they already?
It's funny that you mentioned Wrigley Field because, you get overnight lines typically, in that 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern time corridor at some of the global books that are out there. And, maybe Circa will open up the market here this year. I'm not entirely sure. But the one thing that is always a constant is that the last thing to get posted is the total for a game at Wrigley Field. It is one of those things where they have to double, triple, quadruple check the weather forecast. It can obviously change, in an instant there in the Windy City, but that is always, without fail, one of the last line, I should say, to get put up, unless there's maybe a pitcher injury or something like that. But that is the last line to go up, is the total at Wrigley Field, and it is largely predicated on the wind. If the wind is blowing out, not only do balls fly to the ballpark, but also outfielders have a much more difficult time getting under balls, and pop-ups can wind up landing, and all that kind of thing. So in terms of setting the number, Wrigley is a very extreme example, but in terms of setting the number, specifically with looking at sides, I don't think weather conditions are really factored in all that much. One of the things about the baseball betting market is it feels very subjective. The quant crowd pretty much sets the market after those opening lines get posted. But there are a lot of factors with baseball, and possibly this is because the handles are generally lower than any other sport. But there are a lot of factors with baseball where the odds makers just let the bettors figure it out. They'll kind of put up their number based on how they have the teams and the starting pitchers power rated, and everything else falls on the shoulders of the market. If the wind is going to be blowing out, they maybe shade the total a half a run, but they won't really do a whole lot with the side. They'll let the market kind of figure out, if the market wants to fade that fly ball guy or something like that. So I think it's one of those things where putting up the opening lines is, just something that they kind of do to get something flowing, but then it's really the bettors that absolutely set the baseball betting market, looking at a variety of different environmental factors, of course, their own numbers and stuff like that. But obviously we know in the NFL, weather can have an impact on totals, but even then, those games are posted a week in advance. So it's something that the market kind of shapes and molds as the week goes along. Think about that on a daily basis with baseball, where the total is based on, the teams and the offenses and the pitchers and the starting pitchers and all of that. And it's up to the market to decide what, some of those more external, unquantifiable factors are worth.
All right, so there you go. If you're not like a max bettor, you could still use certain metrics like the fly ball rate and things like that if you know a little bit about the wind in certain stadiums. And that's been something that's been somewhat successful for me. So that's why I wanted to ask that question. So great answer on that. And I do agree, for many sports, these lines come out and the low limits just lets the market figure it out before they raise them up. It's a great way of doing it. And it's a little bit lazy, you can say, for the books to do it that way, but why wouldn't you? You're not getting really affected by $100 bettors, they set the market, and then the line's probably closer to right when the bigger bettors come in, and there's usually going to be some dual action on each side of those. So good stuff with that one, man. So I have a question for, I guess, in general, and you can answer this one any way you want. And it's about really the bullpen here. How do you factor in bullpens when handicapping a game? I've always kind of moved my number, whether, and I don't do a perfect model by any means, like the modeling crowd out there. They think everyone's got their own answers they think is best. But for me, I do factor in the bullpen and the closer. I just never know how much to do it, but I try to look for outliers when some of their best bullpen pitchers are tired. Can you explain how you do that?
Yeah, so that's something that's really important is, pitcher usage and availability are really important when it comes to factoring in a bullpen. If I'm going to bet on a team, I expect them to have a lead. And if I expect them to have a lead, I expect them to finish it off. So I need to know what the status is of their relievers. If their top setup guy, their high leverage guy, their fireman, so to speak, has pitched 3 days in a row, he's not available that day. And if maybe the second best reliever has pitched 3 days in a row, he's not available that day. So at that point, that's when I start looking at first five, or maybe fading that team, or just staying away from the game. I want to know who is available. And you never know who's going to be used because you don't know what the score of that game is going to be or anything like that, any of the situations. But I just want to know who's available and who isn't. And if I run into a situation where there are several guys that have pitched 3 of the last 4 days or something like that, it is honestly enough to take me off of a game. Or it's enough to put me on the other side. Because I'll sit there and say, look, if I get this team 2-2, especially with underdogs, if I get this team 2-2 or 3-3 in the 6th or 7th inning, something like that, and their primary relievers are available and the other teams are not, then I'm more inclined to take a shot on an underdog like that because I think there could be some late game shenanigans. So that is 110% something I take a look at, especially when you consider that starting pitchers are throwing fewer innings than ever before. The bullpens are of much more importance than they ever have been. So I need to know who's out there. I need to know, if the starter is going to get in trouble in the 5th or 6th inning and a team's going to go to his bullpen, early on, maybe go to one of those high leverage guys in the middle innings, something like that. Who's left? Who will be there to possibly pick up that slack? It is critically important to me. And a couple of stats I look at specifically here. I want bullpens that are not going to give up home runs. So that's either a high strikeout rate or a high ground ball rate, because the great equalizer in the late innings is the home run. It is harder than ever before to get a base hit in Major League Baseball. You just look at the stuff, the velocity, everything. Pitchers are better than ever before. So if I'm looking at a bullpen that doesn't give up home runs, that's one of my favorite bullpens to back, because I know that they're not going to give up that critical back-breaking 3-run shot. Teams are not having as much success manufacturing innings. So I want strikeouts and ground balls out of my bullpen, and I will avoid bullpens like the plague that have high walk rates, because I do not want to back a lot of bullpens that put themselves into bad situations, that create their own messes, that then open up the possibility of those multi-run homers. So strikeout and walk rate are two very, very big things I look at for bullpens. And if you don't have a high strikeout rate, but you have a high walk rate, and it's harder for you to get out of those jams, that is a team that I will very rarely bet on in a full game context.
Well, how about like a stat like bullpen OPS, like the lowest bullpens? Doesn't that kind of go with the strikeout and walkout rate somewhat?
To a degree. I mean, you really don't look too much at ERA with bullpens, because, sometimes things just kind of happen and you've got small sample sizes, particularly very early on in the season. But there's a stat called FIP, which is fielding independent pitching. And there are 4 components to FIP. It's strikeouts, walks, hit by pitches, and home runs. And the idea behind this stat is that those are the 4 things a pitcher can control: strikeouts, walks, home runs, and hit by pitches. So it takes defense out of the equation. So if I've got a bullpen that's doing really well in FIP, it means they're striking out a lot of guys, they're not giving up a lot of walks, and they're not giving up a lot of home runs. So FIP is probably the most important team stat that I look at outside of, really looking at strikeout and walk rate. And the thing of it is, FIP incorporates both of those metrics. So it's kind of an all-encompassing tool for looking at which bullpens are having success, which ones aren't, and then kind of gauging whether or not there's some regression signs for that team.
And you can find that information on Fangraphs to all your listeners out there. Adam, and I'm going to keep pounding this point here. Where's a good place for our listeners to look at to find out if these pitchers are tired, or if they pitch 3 days in a row, like you mentioned, or is it just way digging deeper into the teams themselves and looking at the actual players?
So one of the nice things here is that my job has become very easy in terms of doing research, whether it's for the guide or on a daily basis, because there is just a ton of phenomenal baseball information out there. Lots of great resources. Roster Resource is one of them. And this used to be its own site, but now Fangraphs has it. And you can look at the team pages and you can see the bullpen usage. It'll show you, 4, 5, 6 days in the past in terms of when those guys pitched. You'll be able to see, when the starters are coming up in the rotation, all of that. So Roster Resource at Fangraphs is really good. There's another site here that's called Baseball Press, baseballpress.com. They have a bullpen usage page. There's a link right at the top. It's a very easy to read chart showing when those guys most recently pitched. So those are 2 places that I look every day when handicapping the card, just to see how those bullpens kind of stand. All
right, great stuff. And make sure you check out ATS.io as well, because Adam did a great job last year in not just the MLB, but the Korean League as well, tracking some of these bullpen movements, I've noticed. So great job there, Adam. And real quick, I just wanted to mention that bullpen is so important. You can take a team like the Phillies last year. If you bet on the Phillies first 5, I think you did pretty well last year. But if you bet on them full game, their bullpen blew a ton of holds and wins, really, for the Phillies last year. And I think that was a big thing for their season's overall success, wasn't it, Adam?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They were... I have to pull it up here. Let me see if I can get it while we're talking. But they were a team that, they were dead last in bullpen ERA. They had just so many problem areas. A team that really struggled in the back end of games. And they did have a top 5 rotation by FWAR, wins above replacement player. They were a really good rotation. They had a really good lineup as well. But the bullpen was just such a debacle, such a disaster for them that, it was really a lot to overlook over the course of the season. They definitely left some games out there, to say the least. And the nice thing is, they have improved that bullpen a little bit here for this season. They brought in some major league caliber guys, some guys that, were really, really strong for their previous teams. So I don't remember exactly where it is, and I can't find it here while I'm talking, but they're a team that if they had just been league average in terms of win percentage after the 6th inning, they would have won 3 or 4 more games. So it was definitely something that had a really big impact, especially over just a 60-game season.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something I noticed throughout the season that's helped me towards the end of the season was looking at the Phillies and in these situations. So very important stuff. And thank you for that, Adam. And so we talked about regression before, but I wanted to remind our listeners about it. When you look at pitchers, and I think the market has figured some of this stuff out, but there's also team batting. Where do you look at for regression? And you can obviously use the ERA and FIP comparison, and maybe give us some others as far as pitching or as batting.
Yeah, so as far as individual pitchers go, and this is a really easy way to get a jump start on the market. If you've got a pitcher and you can go to Fangraphs and you can go to the leader pages or go to a guy's player page or whatever else, and if you see a guy with a higher ERA than his FIP and XFIP, and it's a significant gap at that, you will see money come in on that pitcher. So, for example, I'll throw a name out there to you here to keep in mind. Aaron Cevalle pitches for the Indians. I'm not doing this because I'm an Indians fan, but just to illustrate here, Cevalle last year in his 12 starts had a 4.74 ERA, but he had a 4.03 FIP and a 3.92 XFIP, which is FIP with a league average home run to fly ball percentage. So when you see a guy whose ERA is, 0.7, 0.8, 0.9 runs higher than his FIP, money's probably coming in on that guy. And early on in the season, what a lot of people will do is they'll look at the previous season. They'll look to see, was his ERA a lot higher than his FIP and his XFIP? And if so, they'll bet on those guys early on in the year, just expecting that positive regression. On the flip side, Dallas Keuchel for the White Sox last year, in his 11 starts, had a 1.99 ERA with a 3.08 FIP and a 3.98 XFIP. So when you see the opposite, where the ERA is lower than the FIP and the XFIP, money will probably come in against that guy because of the expectation of regression. So from an individual pitcher standpoint, look for that. Look for differences between ERA and FIP, ERA and XFIP. Even if you don't bet on that game or you don't have a strong opinion on that game, the market will move in a lot of cases based solely on that. It will be the sole justification for the line move in that game to fade that starting pitcher. So that's a really easy thing to look at. And something else, too, as far as regression analysis goes, another stat to keep an eye on is left on base percentage. Something that's too high will regress. Something that's too low will also regress towards the mean. League average for left on base percentage is about 73%. So anything way on the high side or way on the low side, that's ripe for regression. And then lastly, looking at splits, looking at how teams are doing with runners in scoring position. If they're doing really, really awful, that should positively regress to the mean. If they're way better than league average, putting up ridiculous numbers with runners in scoring position, something like that, that should cool off a little bit too. So those are 3 things that I look for in terms of, just clear-cut signs of regression that, over the long term should kind of gradually go back to the mean, whether that's positive or negative.
Yeah, RISP is something I've always had a massive problem with the Chicago Cubs myself, man. There's been a couple years here that they just left a lot of people on base, and I just kind of blamed it to clutch hitters. But I think the general term or the general rule is these teams will regress back to the mean, whether it's on the positive side or on the negative side. So be looking for those outliers. And Adam does a great job on ATS.io. His average is about 3 podcasts a week for baseball, and you cover all that stuff. So thank you for doing that for us and the sports bettors.
Real quickly for listeners, if you want to read more about this concept, it's actually a concept called cluster luck, which is in a really good book written by Joe Pita called Trading Bases. It's a great read. It's an easy read. A lot of good stuff about betting on baseball, and in particular, looking at some of those regression analysis signs. Specifically, there's a lot of attention paid to this concept of cluster luck, which I think is something that every handicapper should be aware of. And it's a good read. It's a good book. I haven't read it in a few years, but I'm definitely going to have to do a refresher and just see if there's anything I missed from that. But it's called Trading Bases by Joe Peta, P-E-T-A on that one.
All right, great stuff. Well, in a nutshell here, I guess maybe be a summary to your guide. Who are some of the teams that could be might be better than the market's perception coming into the year? And who are some of the teams that might be fade candidates based on what the market's saying?
So far, a couple of things I've seen, even just from opening day lines real quickly here, is that there is no degree of confidence in the Texas Rangers. I believe they're going to be the worst team in the American League. I've already bet their season win total under, actually their season win percentage under. One of the books that's out there. But they got faded already for opening day when the global openers got posted. So that's one that I would definitely take a look at. They're going to be faded quite a bit here this season. Boston was another one where I saw their line kind of come down a little bit for opening day. And maybe that has to do with Nate Eovaldi, but I think it's more about the perception of the Red Sox in general. And you will see a lot of that early on in the year. There will be teams that are isolated as bye teams that will be isolated as fade teams, and the market will move on or against them pretty frequently early on in the season here. So keep an eye out for that. Similarly, the same pitchers will get money every time they start or get bet against every time they start until they prove something otherwise. So you can keep an eye out for that as well. But overall here, I think the Phillies are a better team than people realize. I bet their season win total over 80.5. Bet them a little better than 9-1 to win the NL East. I think they're a team that has some value. And as we just talked about, they fixed up their bullpen a little bit. So I think that increases their ceiling to a pretty high degree. I like the Brewers over. I like the Astros over. I have World Series tickets on both of them. Not because I think they win, but because I think they get me to the playoffs. And I can start hedging and doing some different things there. As far as some fade teams here, I like the Rangers under, as I mentioned already. I really like Oakland under. That's probably my strongest win total play here, under 87.5. I just don't think they're going to be as good as they've been in previous years. Now, all of a sudden, because they've been so good 3 years in a row, they've had a couple of upper 90-win seasons. They won the division in the 60-game sample last year. Now I think they're finally overpriced in the market at 87.5. So I did fade the A's. I don't really like that team at all, quite frankly. And then another team I'm kind of looking at to go under here, and I haven't pulled the trigger as of yet, but the more I sit there and think about it, the more I don't like the Washington Nationals. They're an older team. They're a very top-heavy team with Juan Soto and Trey Turner. Max Scherzer is not getting any younger. Steven Strasburg is, hurt all the time, as we know. Patrick Corbin had a velocity decrease last year. Their bullpen is on the older side. So I think I'm going to wind up here with a piece of Washington under before the games start tomorrow.
Okay, good stuff. So for the Brewers and Astros, did you say you're taking a future on them or just their season win total's over?
So I wound up playing both. I wound up playing the season win totals over for both teams, but I also have World Series futures on them. I've got Houston at 25-1, and I've got Milwaukee at 55-1, which was a rogue number out there in the market that I haven't seen otherwise. I've seen 50, 45, and 50 out there pretty predominantly. But the thought process behind that one is, and you know this, having followed the Cubs and all that, being a Wisconsin guy, the NL Central sucks. I mean, it's not good. It's a very, very bad division. All of these teams are below average offensively. And I don't think the Cardinals are that much better than everybody else in that division, with the exception of the Pirates, of course. So I took a shot on the Brewers, being the team that emerges as the division champion. They go right to the division series, which means they avoid the Padres or the Dodgers, whoever's in the wild card game. And they also wouldn't play the best team in the National League in the first round, which will probably be the Dodgers. So they wouldn't play them until the second round, the championship series. So I think the Brewers, not that they would beat the Braves or the Mets necessarily, but at 55-1 or even 45 or 50, as long as they get me to the playoffs, I've got some significant hedging margin there with them. And I do think that they're the best team in that NL Central division. So that's why I took a piece of the Brewers at a long shot price, not because I think they shocked the world or anything, but just as, a long-term investment where I've got some profit potential at the end.
All right. No, that's fantastic analysis. The Cubs should be taking a step back. A few guys in contract years, but it doesn't sound like the Cubs are negotiating too much with them anyway, but they still have to show good for other teams. But I think the Cubs have some serious holes, and the Cardinals definitely overvalued, in my opinion, too, coming in. They did make a couple good moves in the offseason, but I don't know if it's enough. And the Brewers can be sneaky here. They do have the power of the bats, and if they can just fix some of their pitching there, they could be a really sneaky team. So I really like what you're saying about them. So great stuff, Adam. We're out of time, but where can our listeners find your great information on not just a day-to-day basis, but find some of the plays that you might be making throughout the year?
Yeah, you can find it over at ats.io. The 2021 MLB betting guide is posted over there as a landing page with links to all of the content, 30 season win total previews, division, pennant, World Series futures, also some player futures stuff for the MVP and the Cy Young with that guide. And also, too, a stats glossary on, what I use to handicap, the different sabermetric stats that are out there. We didn't even scratch the surface on a lot of the stuff that I use, like looking at StatCast data for exit velocities and barrel percentages and all those kinds of things. So it's a very in-depth guide, a very in-depth handicapping style that I have. But I think one of my strengths is presenting it in a way that everybody can understand, whether you know the metrics or not, whether you're a math genius or not. It's really all about interpreting the data. You don't have to know the formulas. You just have to know how to interpret the data. And that's what I try to do on a daily basis over at ats.io and with the betting guide. At Skating Tripods on Twitter. Got a link to the guide in PDF form as well, if that's a little bit easier. But daily picks articles start tomorrow. And, hopefully all this hard work and all this preseason research translates well to the day-by-day betting. But, I'm excited for the season to get started and excited to see how the market kind of reacts coming off of the very unconventional 60-game season.
Well, Adam, a huge thank you from me, and I'm sure all of your listeners and followers for that. You provide such a massive value for us to have some fun during the summer, bet on a few baseball games, enjoy ourselves, and possibly get an edge. Just listen to your podcast, whether you be in the car, on the way to work, at the gym. A couple minutes, you learn so much from Adam, and find great spots to bet where you can actually have an advantage over the market before they do the analysis themselves. So thank you so much, Adam, and thank you for coming on this show for so many months now that we've been doing this, and you've been a massive asset to our listeners, a massive asset to the odds breakers, and a true friend of mine. So I just wanted to make sure I thank you for that.
No, man, absolutely. It's an honor to come on your show. You do such a phenomenal job with it, and you've really carved out quite a name for yourself in this business over the last couple of years here, and I'm really happy to see it. You're a smart guy. You do a lot of good work. You're one of the guys who does it the right way in this business, and I hope I wish you have nothing but continued success as we go forward here, Kiev.
A huge thanks to Adam Burke for coming on and breaking down the Final Four and giving us an amazing preview and some plays for this MLB baseball season. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to tweet us at the Odds Breakers. Everybody enjoy the rest of your week and go get some winners.